Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about, a really popular kind of old technique that has been looked at. And when you look at it, both in terms of just what makes sense, it doesn't really make sense. And then when it's been studied, it's been found to actually be inferior to just doing normal training, meaning people in the lab, they gain less muscle when they use it. That's called pre-exhaustion. So for people who are unfamiliar with that, pre-exhaustion is the idea is that if you have a specific muscle you want to grow and you're worried about lifting too heavy, so the whole idea is to reduce total load on a big exercise. Okay, do you see where we're going with this? You take a smaller movement like a single joint or isolation type movement and you train it really hard, maybe to failure, and then you do the big lift. So that then you get the benefits in that muscle of the big lift, supposedly, but it becomes a limiting factor, and therefore you have to reduce weight. So let's say, an example, right? Let's say that normally you can bench, 300 pounds for 5 reps, right? And someone would have you pre-exhaust the pec, so you would do like some dumbbell flies or cable flies to failure and then get under the bench. And instead of 300 for 5, you might have to go down to, 225 for 5 or, 200 for 10 or something. All right. Same thing with something like a deadlift. You saw me doing a deadlift there. Let's say normally, your 5 rep max is 500 pounds, right? You would do some hamstring curls to failure. And then you'd go do 300 pounds or 315 or 365 or something. You greatly reduce the load. All right, does anyone see the problem with this? You basically are doing the big movement for no benefit. In other words, oftentimes we do these smaller movements or single joint or isolation movements because they work a slightly different angle of a big muscle, and we're there to finish it off and make sure it gets thoroughly worked. But we get good exercise economy. So normally we do big exercises for the purpose of the big movements stimulate more muscle. So if we're setting aside performance, strength, neural drive, and we're just looking at muscle size, big movements give good exercise economy because they stimulate multiple muscles, right? The deadlift makes more than just your hamstrings grow. The bench press makes more than just your pecs grow. A squat makes more than just your quads grow. But what people would have you do in this is make it to where the other muscles don't get properly stimulated because you're not using enough weight, because it's so light, because that one muscle is so fatigued, you can't do any weight, right? At least compared to what you normally would do. How's this worked out in the lab and other stuff? What happens in all the studies we've looked at to where we do really short breaks because we're too fatigued and we can't replicate the same weight? They cause less muscle growth. If you're training so close together on the big exercises that you can't replicate your performance, so the weight is reduced, which is the same thing you just did with the pre-exhaustion. It's generally been found that it causes less muscle growth. Why? Because we haven't given all the upper threshold fibers enough time to recover, to do their thing. So we're right over to more intermediate fibers that grow less. So we're getting less stimulus to the muscle fibers that have the most potential for growth because they need longer to recover, right? The more fast twitch a muscle is up the chain, because there's like a 15 or 20 different fiber types through there. The more faster twitch fibers, they require longer to recover. The slowest twitch ones are obviously your endurance ones. That's what you're doing to run. That's what you're using to run a marathon, or you're using to walk. Okay. They can just go over and over and over. They can go thousands of times. The fastest twitch might only be able to really hammer a few times inside of 3 or 4 minutes, and then they're done. They need that much break after they fired, let's say 3, 4, 5 times. Those muscle fibers might actually need several minutes before they can even fire again. Those are also the ones that have the most growth potential. So the further you get up that chain, the more growth potential they have. And I'm not saying slower twitch fibers don't grow. They do. It's just they grow less total. Haven't we just done the same thing with the pre-exhaustion? Except now we haven't got any of the benefits of the big movement. Because if you can normally squat 365 for 10 reps or 315 for 10 reps, and you've pre-exhausted something to where because your quads are exhausted, you can only do 225 for 10. Sure, it's easier on recovery because it's a warm-up set. But it wasn't enough to stimulate the glutes, the adductors, all that stuff. Those muscles didn't get the growth stimulus because they were just way understimulated because the quads are exhausted. But if you exhausted the quads with the extensions, guess what? The quads are also not recruiting maximally on the squat either because they haven't recovered enough to be worked correctly. Okay? They're still too tired to be properly stimulated on the next set. Not all the muscle fibers will fire. They're not going to actually activate. They're just going to stay turned off. Which again is why you can't lift as much weight then. Even for sets of 10. We're talking about for rep work, not your maxes. Well, guess what? When that's been looked at in the lab, it does the same thing. It's less muscle growth. And in fact, it's way less muscle growth because you're not getting the benefits of the multi-joint movement. It's only getting to the weakest muscle, and that weakest muscle isn't recovered enough because of the smaller movement to be maximally stimulated. So it makes sense when you look at how muscles work that it doesn't work in the lab. It was an idea that kind of came out of the bodybuilding world that guys have successfully gotten away with who use enough drugs. But what do we know about that? We know that drugs are capable of re-stimulating more of the intermediate fibers once they've maxed out. Because your highest threshold fibers probably don't ever truly max out in size for anyone. Okay, we can keep hypertrophying those for 20 years. It's just that it's less and less and less as we go. And that's even for naturals. All right. With gear, we reactivate the muscle fibers, all the more intermediate ones that have reached kind of their max natural size. And this is what the data is starting to show. This is what we realize is going on. So therefore, any of this exhausting work really works well with those substances. So yes, some serious bodybuilders have gotten away with doing this. But for everyone else, the data shows that it's actually inferior. You would be better just doing the big movement for multiple sets than doing the small movement, which is what I recommend. It's what most good coaches recommend. Look, you want to build your hamstrings with a smaller movement, do your deadlifts or RDLs for multiple sets, and then go do your hamstring curls. It repeatedly works better in the lab, and it makes sense. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.